Hi everybody, Michael Fisk with Tri-States. I think it's on. Today is Friday, June 10th, and we'll give everyone a couple of minutes to get logged on. And as per tradition these days, I can see what's going on with my hair. um, right now, it doesn't look like anybody's on, so we'll just give it a couple of minutes. I guess we'll go ahead and do the safety message, even though nobody's on, here. But if you watch this while you're driving, please don't. It is amazing, as I drive cross country and various times I see drivers. Thankfully, not tri-state drivers, but I do see drivers holding their cell phone, and I can kind of tell that they're watching a movie or something while they're holding the steering wheel, and of course it's not something that we can support. But maybe we need to market this better. We'll give another minute here. You know what? Actually, there are people on. I'm sorry. I'm seeing Melissa and Brian, but normally, it shows up, that people are logged on, and I'm not seeing that. So, again, Facebook changes, randomly. So yeah, I apologize. I didn't think anybody else was on here. But Melissa, is it raining there? Assuming here, it is not. Luckily, but I know there is a lot of rain, in different places here. So we'll go and get started here. Yeah, hi to everyone, that's joined. I see Riley that's on as as well. Like I said, I was just a little bit confused about the format, and I was just sitting there staring at my hair. So. The list of things I want to talk about, I don't have a lot. So, if you've got subject matters or conversation pieces that you want to discuss, please send it in. We always debate about, how often we should do these. When we first started them, I think we were doing them once a month. And then COVID, became, something that we need to communicate a lot. And so we started doing these every day even. And then, we kind of back it off. It's like meetings. We don't want just random meetings that don't have any value. But at the same time, it's, it is fun for me. It is, and others to be able to connect, with drivers, and so forth. So, it's I feel like a lot of times we don't have a lot to cover, except for encouragement and again just engagement and connection, here. But we're always looking for things to discuss, for sure. In 2 weeks, we're working on a pretty significant Facebook Live. But like I said, I for those that are in this every time I'm on here, there's no subject I'm not willing to talk about, even if it's a little awkward, there. So send anything you got, please. Yeah, Jack, Richard, Orlando. Hey guys, Dennis, Cheston. Yeah, hi to everybody. The first thing, we're basically halfway through the year, a couple of weeks away from halfway through the year. Company's doing great. I hope each of you are doing great. At least things that the company can help and support. I know that there's a lot of personal challenges, some health issues. Janine Braun, if you're on, again, our heart goes out to you. She recently lost her husband. Kenneth and Janine have been with us many, many years, and so, we're not, impervious to challenges, and so forth, in our personal lives. I know there's a lot going on, inflation, economy. I mean, it's obviously every time you fuel up your truck, we see the fuel prices, increases, that hits our business, for sure. Each of you, as your spouses that are home and your, personal vehicles, obviously you're seeing, all of that, and groceries, and I don't know that, a lot of our drivers have, babies of their own, but grandchildren and so forth, and formulas and stuff. So certainly there's still, challenges that, is going on. But, at the end of it all, the company, is doing well, and for you and me, for all of us, the company's strength is, provides my personal strength and your personal financial strength, and so all of those things, affect everything else, and we just grow the company the best that we can, and at least provide that financial stability, for all of us. Company's doing well, really well. I'm owner operators. You're making more money, than you ever have. There's still things, thunder clouds on the horizon. Melissa was asking about rain, but it's AB5, which is going to impact California for sure. Other states that are kind of watching California to see what that does. Obviously, on the federal level, the PRO Act, basically, a momentum to try to almost eliminate owner operatorship. It's for the last couple of years, we've kept an eye on it. We've met a couple of times about it recently because there are some more activity going on, with AB5. And it's, from what we can tell, maybe August, September, October, that there's going to be some more movement on the AB5, which we don't think is going to be positive. Now, again, we'll just kind of keep an eye on it, and that's something that that we look at. You look at housing, trajectory, projections, and various other things. There's things to be aware of. One of the challenges on this, and we had this conversation, I've had this conversation, with some of you, as drivers, and, we talk about in the office, is, so much of our economic, challenges, I think, are almost, we talk it into fulfillment. I mean, it's, and so again, we don't make decisions based on, negativity and whatever, but we want to be realistic. But we are optimistic, about the future, but we're cautious. Things tend to be cyclical. We've had 3 really strong years. A couple of months in COVID was a little bit clumsy, but we recovered really well from that, as a company and individually. So our owner operators are doing great. Our company drivers, I just, pulled that up this morning in preparation for this. I think, well, right now, we have 75 company drivers that are over $50,000 already this year, which suggests that they'll, continue that through the year and be over 100,000, for the year. Our top paid company drivers are on pace for about $140,000 a year. You've heard us talk about it. You've heard John talk about it. We want drivers to make as much money as possible. In fact, for what you do and the sacrifices you make, it's you should all be 6 figures. Now, it's an interesting challenge, that comes up though, and I'm just kind of, talking off the cuff a little bit here. In the industry, what we see happening is the more drivers are paid, the more home time they want to take, and I get it. It's but there's various studies and economists that look at the driver industry in particular. And it appears that somewhere around $75,000, $80,000 to $80,000 for most over-the-road drivers is kind of the financial sweet spot. And if they can make that money working less, they're going to. We kind of make the assumption that if you can work the same amount and make more money, that would be the choice. But that's the luxury that people that sleep in their own beds every night have. It's like, oh yeah, I'll keep working 40 hours a week, and let's make more money. but for drivers, and it's not just, us, tri-state drivers, but, drivers in the industry as a whole, I think what we're finding, the industry's finding is, hey man, I made $80,000 last year, I was gone 310 nights, this year if I can make 80,000 and only be gone 280 nights, great. I'd rather have that extra 30 days, to spend with my family, and we get it, there. But it's interesting what the trickle down to that is because now, we have less utilization per each truck, which means we have to have more trucks. At least it means less miles. It means, we have to have more drivers to move the same amount of freight, and all of those kind of things. So those are all the things that the industry, deals with, as, again, our goal is to get our drivers, as much money as possible. So I'm hopeful that a good, I don't know, 40, 50% of our over-the-road fleet, at least, should be over that $100,000 a year mark, and I'll continue to let you guys know how that's going. But but that's always something that's been important to John and Russ and myself and others. You guys earn it. You guys deserve it. Company paid with the benefits and everything, typically add 20, 30%, if you're participating in everything versus independent contractors, owner operators. But the bottom line is everybody's doing well. And, inflation is I don't know how the government factors it, but they say it's like 8.5%, and I'm sure most of you or many of you are feeling it at a much higher percentage. But our drivers are certainly able to keep up with inflation, there, and we're proud of that. So anyway, there's a couple comments, questions here. Hey, Jake Moffitt. Paula Hayes. I'm sorry, Paula. Gene Braun's daughter. Well, thanks for joining us. And again, I mean, it's Gene and Kenneth and Paula. Certainly, you're in our thoughts and in our prayers. So, Brian Ernston, is working from home going to be the new norm for office staff? Yeah, interesting question. And this is, I'm speaking off the cuff here, Brian. I mean, it's I think it's going to be much more common than was pre-COVID. It's for the most of the world and most of us, we're able to kind of keep going. And COVID is not, I fly and I don't have to wear a mask, when I fly anymore and so forth. But, we did have an issue with COVID, just this past week in our orientation, so it's not something, that's gone away. We do need to be, COVID aware, but we're also finding, that, our effectiveness, the office staff, and everything. And again, I understand there's challenges and it's extremely frustrating, as a driver when you're not getting a hold of anybody. It was bad enough when everybody's in the office, at least you knew they were working, but now I understand where there's suspicions that, okay, they're working from home and that's why I can't get a hold of anybody. And that's extremely frustrating. We get that. I get that. It's, So I don't have a simple answer if working from home is going to be the new norm, except my personal speculation is probably. I mean, it's and again, there's economic realities and financial realities, that goes into that type of thing as well. The company pre-COVID was prepared to spend a lot of money on building a terminal and office in Phoenix. And for any of you who've been into the Phoenix office, parking's tough and you don't know it's a trucking company. You think it's an insurance company, right? I mean, we try to be really responsible with how we spend money and, those kind of things. And with COVID, we've not, built the shiny new office and terminal, in Phoenix that was discussed pre-COVID, type of thing. For the office staff. And again, we have needs and we've transitioned, several, drivers, from the road to the office. We're always looking for, that driver, background, support. However, you got to take a big pay cut, and that tends to be the biggest challenge, that the drivers, have transitioning from, over the road, especially, to the office is it's a pretty significant pay cut, there. But, for our office staff, it's instead of sometimes paying more money, then there's other benefits, that can be offered, that doesn't cost the company as much, financially, so we can reallocate those, resources elsewhere, type of thing, So Brian, that's a good question, and that's something that we continue, monitor and consider, type of thing, and it's, we've got to make sure that the drivers in particular get the support that they need, that the company work is continues to be accomplished. But certainly, we have, I don't know, 200 or so, office, staff as well scattered around the country that, it is a, benefit, to them, for many of them to be able to work from home, as well, and that flexibility. So like I said, it's not a decision we have to make today, whether it's a permanent thing or not. But that's kind of some of the thought process that goes behind. Melissa, if you want to plan vacations, when's the best time of the year considering freight volume? Yeah, that's a great question. What we do, I mean, things, conflicts, overseas, Ukraine, Russia, potentially, other places. Obviously, those things are hard to predict. For us, it used to be an off season. We'd say, December, January, February. It used to be kind of the off season. We haven't really experienced that, right? For a couple of years. So, I guess the winter months typically is still going to be a better, time as far as drivers and freight volume, and planning, type of thing. But. And I have this conversation, with those in the office too, and you guys need to know. I mean, it's the office staff, the drivers are doing a lot. They're doing a lot. I mean, it's and so we talk about burnout and want to manage burnout. I think it's incredibly important that drivers take time off, when they can. So Melissa, I'd encourage you, take the vacation when you need to. I mean, get away. The freight's always going to be there, God willing. The work is always there, type of thing. So just do it when you need to, for your own personal well-being and health. So, Martha Barnes, hi, Philip and Amy Hinge, the No Reds, hi, Daniel and Ginger. So anyway, it's just kind of wanted to just talk about the health of the company, overall. It's we're growing. Our customers continue to ask us to provide more capacity, to them. It's because of the level of service, that the drivers, provide. Our CSR group, operations group, safety support, all of that, So it's just tremendous. Martha, border crossing monies for owner operators. And if I can, I'll just offer this. I mean, it's the amount of money that's available everywhere. Everybody's doing well. I mean, it's and so I get it. I mean, our company drivers, if they go into Quebec, make an extra bonus, for that. The rate that our owner operators get is very well, so it's, I don't know that that's something that we'll move on, but feel free to call me directly, if that's a super, important thing for you, and we can at least talk about it, for sure. Kelsey, hi. I hope everybody knows Kelsey and Jake. I mean, it's, for those of you who've been with us 4 or 5 years, you may not know Kelsey and Jake, but they are our intro fleet. They're the ones that, if you've been with us, less than a couple of years, you probably know them well. But they're the ones that help transition new hires, new drivers, into Tri-State, because what we do is so unique, and the training required for that, and the expertise required for that. And Jake and Kelsey are just rock stars, and if you're ever in the office, just go say hi to him. Jake is one of the top 5 funniest and maybe smartest people, that we have in the company both, there. I mean, it's Kelsey started out in recruiting. She's passionate about drivers. We're so lucky, that Kelsey, I think, worked for Best Buy or something like that, selling refrigerators and microwaves and whatever. And she's been with us, I think, a couple of years now. Just tremendous there. So we're grateful for all of you. So anyway, unless there's something else, to cover, I'm going to go and sign off. We're grateful for you. Appreciate you. Like I said, in 2 weeks, we've got some big things that we will be sharing here on Facebook Live, and other things. But, things are well, and hopefully, each of you, things are well, in your personal and professional lives. And if they're not, reach out to me. I want to know what's going on. So anyway, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye.